The foal cost $1 at the Pratt County spring livestock sale, which was what it cost because nobody else bid, which was itself because the foal was clearly dying, and everyone at the sale knew it. He was a chestnut colt, maybe 6 weeks old, with a broad white blaze from his forehead to his nose and 4 white stockings and the labored breathing of an animal whose lungs were fighting something they were losing to. He stood in the corner of the temporary pen with his head lower than it should have been, and his eyes dull in the way that sick young animals' eyes go dull, not closed, not panicked, just the specific absence of engagement that means the body is using everything it has for something other than looking at the world. His legs were unsteady. He had lost condition fast, the visible weight loss of a young animal that has stopped eating because eating requires more effort than it returns. The man selling him had started at $10 that morning. He had come down to $5, then $3, then $1. At $1, there were still no hands in the air. Cora Marsh was at the rail. She had come to the sale for the feed pricing and to look at the heifer in the third pen, which she had decided against before she reached the second pen. She had not planned on the foal. She had not planned on spending anything. She had $14 in the household account and the spring planting to think about, and a farm that was operating on the specific margin of a woman who has been doing everything correctly for 14 months and is still one bad season from a conversation with the bank. She looked at the foal for a long moment. He was breathing wrong. That was the first thing she had noticed, a wet, effortful quality to the breath that suggested the lungs were involved, which in a foal this age usually meant Rhodococcus equi, which she knew because her father's veterinary manual had a chapter on respiratory infections in young horses that she had read in January during the week when she had nothing to do but read. The infection was serious. It was also treatable if caught early enough and managed correctly with erythromycin, which was available at the county veterinary supply. She raised her hand. The auctioneer looked at her with the expression of a man who has been trying to move a sick foal for 3 hours and is not going to question the only bidder. $1. Going once. Going twice. She loaded the foal into the truck bed on a bed of straw she had brought for the heifer she hadn't bought, and she drove home. The county's opinion formed before she reached the gate. She knew this because the co-op was across from the sale grounds, and Walt Greer had been at the window, and what Walt Greer saw before noon was county knowledge by supper. What Walt Greer saw was Cora Marsh paying $1 for a dying foal and loading it with more care than the animal probably warranted and driving home with it. By Thursday, when she came to the co-op for wire, 2 people had already said something kind and concerned about the foal, which was the county's way of saying they expected her to be disappointed and wanted to be ready to receive the disappointment graciously. She said the foal was improving and bought her wire and drove home. Reed Alderman was at the east fence when she pulled into the yard. He had been checking the fence wire on the shared drainage section, which he did on most Tuesdays, though the drainage section had been fine since April, and they both understood this. He looked at the truck and then at the foal visible in the bed, and then at Cora getting out of the cab, and his expression went through several adjustments in the time it took her to walk around to the tailgate. "What is that?" he said. "Belgian draft colt, 6 weeks." She lowered the tailgate. "He's sick. Rhodococcus equi, probably. Lung infection." He looked at the foal, at the white blaze and the 4 white stockings and the dull eyes and the labored breathing and the obvious distress of a young animal that has been sick for too long without treatment. "Cora." "I know," she said. "Help me get him to the barn." He helped her get the foal to the barn, not because he agreed with the decision. His expression made clear that he had not yet arrived at a position on the decision, but because the foal needed the barn, and standing at the fence having a position was less useful than helping. She had a stall prepared. Not for this foal specifically. She had not known about the foal until this morning, but she kept a clean stall available because her father's management philosophy had been that a clean, empty stall was an asset, and she had continued the practice. She settled the foal in the straw and checked his temperature and his respiratory rate and wrote both numbers in the notebook she kept for the farm records. Then she drove to the county veterinary supply in Pratt and bought erythromycin. The treatment protocol was straightforward. Oral erythromycin twice daily, supportive care, monitoring. The difficulty was that a sick foal that has stopped eating does not willingly take oral medication, and the solution to this was patience and a dose syringe, and the specific stubbornness of a woman who had decided the foal was not going to die in her barn if she could prevent it. She dosed him at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, every day, for 3 weeks. Reed came to the east fence on Thursday with the expression of a man who has had several days to form a position and has formed one. "How is he said. "Breathing easier." She was at the barn door with the morning's observations in the notebook. "Temperature down. He ate this morning." Reed looked at the barn, at Cora, at the barn again. "Belgian draft," he said. "Yes." "You're certain?" "The confirmation is unmistakable once you know what you're looking at." She looked at the notebook. The chest width, the bone density, the hindquarter structure, even at 6 weeks, it's there if you know where to look. "How do you know Belgian draft?" "My father's agricultural encyclopedia, volume 3. There's a full chapter on draft breeds with photographs." She closed the notebook. "I read it in January." He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was filing something. "What does a Belgian draft colt look like at maturity?" She looked at him. She had been waiting for someone to ask this question, and had not expected it to be asked at the east fence on a Thursday morning by a man who had been checking the same section of drainage wire for 2 months. "Come to the barn on Saturday," she said. "I'll show you the photographs." He came on Saturday. She showed him the photographs in her father's agricultural encyclopedia. He looked at them for a long time, the photographs of mature Belgian stallions, the confirmation that the breed was known for, the chest and the hindquarters, and the sheer scale of a horse that had been developed for a century and a half, specifically to be the largest and most powerful working horse in existence. He set the book down. He looked at the barn where the foal was in the stall, 3 weeks into the treatment, beginning to eat correctly, beginning to show the first signs of recovery. Then he looked at Cora. "How long before you know if the genetics are what you think they are?" he said. 6 months, she said, when the muscle development begins in earnest. Belgian drafts grow differently from standard horses. The muscle mass comes in later and faster, and when it comes, it's unmistakable. She paused. "If he's what I think he is." "And if he is." She looked at the encyclopedia photograph, at the stallion in it, the chest the width of a barrel, the hindquarters doubled and solid, the overall impression of a horse that looked as if it had been built rather than born. "Then he's worth considerably more than $1, she said. Reed looked at the photograph, then at the barn, then at Cora with the dark green eyes doing the assessment she had learned to wait out, because it always arrived at something accurate. "I'll come back in 6 months, he said. "The drainage section will need attention by then," she said. "It will," he agreed, and the corner of his mouth moved. The foal recovered. He recovered in the way that young animals recover when they are treated correctly and early enough, not gradually and then quickly, but in a specific stepped progression, each week a measurable improvement over the last, the body reclaiming ground it had lost. By the end of April, his breathing was clear and his eyes were bright, and he was eating with the focused enthusiasm of an animal that has been hungry for a month and has now been given permission to address that. By May, he was moving around the paddock with the specific quality of a young horse that is beginning to discover what its legs can do. By June, the muscle development began. It came the way she had read it would come in the encyclopedia chapter, not gradually, but in a concentrated period of growth that was visible week to week in a way that ordinary horse development was not. The chest began to widen. The hindquarters developed the rounded, doubled musculature that the Belgian breed was known for, the specific visual quality that made people stop and look again, because the ordinary vocabulary for describing horses did not quite contain it. The shoulders filled in with a density that was different from standard horse musculature, denser and more compact, the specific structure of a breed selected for a century and a half, not for speed, but for power. By July, he was unlike any horse in Pratt County. This was not an exaggeration, and she was not a woman who exaggerated. She had measured him against the encyclopedia's breed standard tables every 2 weeks since May, and he was tracking at the high end of the range for every metric. His chest width at 4 months was broader than most standard horses achieved at 2 years. His hindquarters had the doubled conformation that the Belgian breed was known for, and that no other draft breed produced in quite the same proportion. When he moved across the paddock, he moved with the deliberate weight of something substantial, each step placing more horse on the ground than the eye expected from an animal this young, the gait of a breed that had been built to pull loads that would stop other horses entirely. She did not tell anyone what she thought she had. The county's opinion of the situation had been formed on the day she paid $1 for a dying foal, and she saw no reason to revise it before the evidence was complete. The evidence was going to be visible enough by September without any announcement from her. Reed came to the east fence on Thursdays and sometimes on Tuesdays, and by August had stopped pretending the drainage section was the reason. He came and looked at the horse. She had named him Dutch, after the Dutch-Belgian border region where the breed had originated, which Reed said was either very specific or a little dry, and she said it was both. And he said what he saw, and she confirmed or corrected it, and they talked about the horse and the farm and the wheat and the county, and eventually about other things, the way conversations go when they have been started under one pretext and have arrived somewhere else entirely. In September, a horse trader from Wichita came down the county road. His name was Collier, and he had been trading horses in South Kansas for 20 years, and he had the specific eye of a man who can see what a horse is from a truck window at 30 miles an hour. He pulled off the county road and came to the gate and asked if he could look at the horse in the paddock, and Cora said yes. He stood at the paddock fence for 10 minutes without saying anything. Dutch, 8 months old, already 15.2 hands, the chest and hindquarters of a breed conformation that was unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at, moved around the paddock with the deliberate power of an animal that has begun to understand its own strength and is deciding what to do with it. The white blaze was vivid against the chestnut coat. The 4 white stockings were clean. The eyes were bright amber, alert, interested in everything. Collier turned from the fence. He named a price. It was more money than Cora had seen in 3 years of farming. It was more than the farm's annual operating budget. It was, if she was honest with herself, more than she had expected, even knowing what she knew about the breed and what the breed commanded in the right markets. Reed was at the east fence. He had arrived 10 minutes before Collier's truck, which meant he had seen it coming down the county road and had come to the fence. He said nothing while Collier named the price. He looked at Dutch in the paddock, and at Collier at the gate, and at Cora with his dark green eyes, steady and waiting. She turned the offer down. Collier blinked. In 20 years of trading, he had not been turned down on a price this far above market. "I can go higher," he said. "It's not about the price," Cora said. "I'm not selling him." Collier looked at Dutch, at Cora. He was a man who understood negotiating positions and was trying to read what this one was. "He's worth more at stud than as a sale animal," he said, which was an attempt to find the angle. "If you're thinking about a breeding program—" "I am," she said. "That's why I'm not selling him." He left his card. She did not pick it up from the fence post until Tuesday, and only then to file it in the farm records in case it became useful later. Reed came to the barn door after Collier's truck had gone down the county road and was out of sight. Dutch was at the paddock fence watching the truck disappear with the alert attention he gave to everything. Cora was at the barn door with the notebook and the specific expression she wore when something has gone as she calculated it would go, and the calculation is confirmed. "Cora," Reed said. She waited. "What he offered," he said. "That was the number you expected." "Close to it. He came in 10% below where I thought he'd open." "And you knew you weren't going to take it?" "Before he got out of the truck," she said. "Dutch is worth 3 times that at stud if the breeding program produces what the genetics suggest it should. Selling now is selling the future of the operation for the present value of a single animal." He looked at Dutch at the paddock fence, at Cora at the barn door, at the farm that had been her father's and was now hers, the wheat field and the cattle and the barn and the paddock where a Belgian draft colt that had cost $1 in April was now the most valuable animal in Pratt County. "Breeding program," he said. "I need a second animal," she said. "A Belgian mare. There's one listed at a sale in Hutchinson in October. The owner is asking a price I can meet if the fall wheat comes in the way I think it will." "And if the wheat comes in the way you think it will?" "It's going to," she said. "The south section is running ahead of last year, and last year was good. I've been measuring weekly since June." He was quiet for a moment. The September afternoon was what September afternoons in Kansas were when they decided to be generous, warm and specific, and going amber at the edges, the quality of light that made the wheat fields look like they had been put there on purpose. Dutch had lost interest in the departed truck and was now investigating the fence post nearest the barn with the methodical attention he applied to everything in his vicinity. "Cora," Reed said. She looked at him. "I'd like to come to the Hutchinson sale," he said, "in October, if you want company." She looked at Dutch at the fence post, at Reed at the barn door with the dark green eyes and the square jaw and the expression that was the furthest from neutral it had been since March when he had first appeared at the drainage section she had not yet needed him to look at. "It's a Saturday," she said. "I know. The sale starts at 9. I can be at your gate at 7:30. She looked at the notebook in her hand, at the breeding program calculations she had been running since July, at the farm that was going to be different by this time next year, the Belgian mare in the paddock beside Dutch, the breeding program established, the operation that her father had built and that she was now building into something he had not imagined. 7:30, she said. He was there at 7:15, which she counted. They drove to Hutchinson together on a Saturday morning in October, with the Kansas autumn doing what it did when it had decided to commit, the specific gold of a season that knows it is almost over and is making the most of what remains. The road between Pratt and Hutchinson running through country that looked the way Kansas looked when it was being honest about being beautiful. She had the breed standard measurements in the notebook and the price ceiling she had calculated from the fall wheat yield and the breeding program projections she had been running since July. She bought the Belgian mare for a price that the fall wheat had made possible, which was the price her calculations had said it would be. Reed helped her load the mare without being asked, which was becoming the pattern. He was there when things needed doing, and he helped without requiring the help to be named or acknowledged, the same way she had seen him handle the fence wire and the drainage section, and the 3 Tuesday nights in May when she had been struggling with the water line repair on the north section, and he had appeared at the barn door with a pipe wrench at 8 in the evening without explaining how he knew. She had not asked. He had not explained. This was the operating mode they had arrived at, and it worked. They drove back to Pratt with the mare in her trailer and Reed 2 minutes behind her the whole way, and she pulled into the yard at 4 in the afternoon with the feeling of something that has been planned for long enough that its arrival is not a surprise, but a confirmation. He stayed for supper that evening. He had been doing this on Saturdays since August, and by October it had stopped being a notable thing and had become simply the shape of Saturdays, which was a different kind of notable. Dutch came to the shared fence immediately, and stood there with his broad chest against the rail and looked at the mare with the amber eyes and the alert ears of a horse that has formed an instant opinion about this development and finds it favorable. The mare looked back at him with the patient assessment of an animal that has been through several introductions and knows how to take her time about them. "She's good," Reed said. He was at the paddock fence beside Cora, looking at the two horses. "The conformation is right. The chest is correct for the breed." "I measured her before I bought her," Cora said. "She's tracking at breed standard for every metric." "Of course you measured her." Not unkind, the dry thing that was his version of warmth, which she had learned to read correctly over the 7 months he had been at her fence. "Reed," she said. He waited. "Stay for supper," she said. "Not to look at the horses, just supper." He looked at her in the October afternoon, the pale blue eyes and the honey blonde braid, and the farm that had started with a $14 household account and a $1 foal and had become what it was now, what it was going to keep becoming. "All right," he said. He stayed for supper. He came back the following Saturday. By November, the Saturdays had become the structure of the week's end, the way things become structure when two people have been organizing around them long enough to stop noticing that they are. Dutch grew through the winter. He grew the way Belgian drafts grow when they have the genetics and the feed and the management, consistently, powerfully, each month a measurable addition to the conformation that was going to make him what the encyclopedia photographs showed. By the following April, he was 2 years old and 17 hands and the most remarkable horse in Pratt County, and the Wichita trader had come back twice more with higher offers that Cora had declined with the same patience she brought to everything she had decided. The breeding program was in its first season. The mare was in Foal. The calculations, run and rerun over a winter of Saturday suppers at the kitchen table, showed a 5-year trajectory for the operation that made the Wichita trader's best offer look like what it was, the present value of a future that was worth considerably more. Cora did not say this to the trader. She said she was not selling, and she said it clearly and without explanation, because explaining invited argument, and the argument was not worth her time. She said other things in other conversations, at other times, in the kitchen on Saturday evenings, and at the paddock fence in the October light, and at the Hutchinson sale, and at the drainage section that had never needed as much attention as it had received since March. She said them in the specific language she had been developing since a man had appeared at her east fence and stayed, and which did not require the kind of explanation that invited argument, because both of them were working from the same information by November, and by November there was nothing left to explain. Dutch was in the paddock on the morning of his 2nd birthday with the confirmation of an animal that had fulfilled every promise the $1 purchase had implied to the one person at the sale who was paying the right kind of attention. He was, by any measure that actually mattered, the best dollar she had ever spent. Not because of what Collier had offered, or what the breeding program would produce, or what the next 5 years of the operation looked like on paper, though all of those things were true, and she had documented all of them correctly in the notebook. But because of what the dollar had started, which was not only a horse,